Hi friends, Sven here with the Impossible Art. It's a lovely spring day here. We've got a mix of sunshine, clouds, and rain. You can hear the creek roaring in the background, so sound quality is going to be a little bit tricky. That's that kind of static in the background is actually the roar of spring runoff as we speak. Now, today is Saturday, June 3rd, 2023. And I want to start talking some about freedom. It's been a long time since I did any posting with this channel. It's a project that I felt really inspired to start, but being in the process of building my house over here just felt like way too much to work on building the house and try to create content for people out there. However, I recently had a rather unfortunate mishap. I took a fall while rollerblading, and it was a twisting fall that resulted not in impact injury. It didn't flex my wrist, but my wrist twisted in my wrist guard and sprained my wrist. My knee, my foot turned out and sprained my MCL. My elbow landed right in my ribs. I cracked some ribs. And so at the moment, my freedom is greatly impaired. And it sucks. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I mean, so my whole life, my agility, my speed, my ability to move has been one of my greatest sources of joy. It's why I became a circus artist. It's why I run through the mountains. It's why I ride my mountain bike. It's why I do so much of what I do, because that movement, again, just brings me so much joy. But also, that movement has been meditation for me. Standing and juggling for 3 hours straight opens up my creative channel, and suddenly words come pouring through, and I know exactly what to say to a friend, or the letter that I need to write, or what I would want to say in a format like this, presenting into the Ethernet, the ether of the internet. So to have that freedom of motion taken away is just, it is soul crushing for me. It is devastating. It is my personal hell. And the good news is these are all injuries. My wrist is healing, the knee is healing, although I did re-injure it this week because I moved in the wrong way. So that's about a 3-week setback. This is actually today marks 4 weeks since the original injury. And I kind of feel like because I tweaked my knee again that I'm still at ground zero, starting all over to heal things. The good news is I didn't bang my head, I didn't get a concussion, I didn't suffer a traumatic brain injury, I didn't break my neck, I didn't have any kind of paralysis, I didn't crack my pelvis, I didn't break my tailbone. I could have had far worse injuries. These are all tendon injuries, and they will all heal up. The ribs don't even really matter because they're not preventing me from doing anything. It just hurts when I sneeze. But for me, this follows on the heels of several other kind of freak injuries in the past few years. 2 years ago, I went for a much longer run than I was in shape for and strained my left knee. I went to a physical therapist, and that physical therapist did significant damage to my knee in the attempt to help me. So that was really unfortunate. What was probably a 6-week injury that I was hoping to reduce to a 2-week injury became a 6-month injury. And then I finally got started running last summer, and on my 5th run out, I sprained my ankle for the first time in my life. I've always had bomb-proof ankles, and this is something I never even shared with friends because it was just so soul-crushing to me to have just come off of one injury, to finally be starting to get back running, and to have my freedom of movement taken away again for another 6 months. And then this winter, I was having so much fun collaborating with my good friend Joe, the Teton juggler, and we're ice skating and juggling, and just so cool to experience what the human body is capable of, right? Like this human mind, spirit, body mechanism can do the most amazing things given the chance. And it's just being there doing it and getting to witness it, firsthand, seeing all the information that the brain is processing and all the adjustments the body is making. It's one of the most incredible things ever. And just so much joy in collaborating with Joe. He and I work really well together, and just so much fun. And so to be transitioning this summer from the ice skating into rollerblading so I could keep my skating going, and 4th time skating have this injury that's probably means I don't skate until August or September, months out. Just brutal. And it just comes on the heels of these other injuries, and honestly it comes on the heels of basically almost one new traumatic event every year for the past 37 years of my life. And so it's not that these injuries are especially bad. I know people have suffered far, far, far worse than this, and I have no room to complain. But psychologically, it was really hard to feel that I was finally right where I wanted to be, and finally, once again, getting to work on some really fun projects, and just have that all taken away in a split second. So how this ties into freedom, again, obviously my freedom feels very, very limited right now. And it's interesting because I've had a desire from my performing side to do a show about freedom in America right now. For the past couple years, people are screaming about freedom back and forth, whether it was the freedom to move around in society during the pandemic, whether it was the freedom to choose to be vaccinated or not vaccinated, whether it's the abortion issue and people arguing, who has the right to decide what people do with their bodies, which is very similar to the vaccine issue. Does the government get to tell me that I have to have a vaccine, or do I have bodily autonomy? Does the government get to tell me that I cannot choose to have an abortion even if my life depends on it? Obviously I'm a man, so that doesn't affect me personally, but it affects me indirectly through all of the women I care about who might now not be able to get life-saving care as a result of not being able to get an abortion in states that are setting extreme limits on what a doctor can do to help an expecting mother or a woman who's pregnant, much less just someone's freedom to choose, hey, I don't want to have a child right now. So freedom, freedom, freedom. And then we've got the guns issue is another huge one, right? Is the freedom for someone to be able to own a gun more or less important than the freedom for a parent to send their kids to school believing that their child will be safe? And thus far in our country, we have chosen that the freedom to own guns is far more important than the freedom to be alive. We have chosen that it's more important to own guns and accept the fact that people are going to kill each other, including innocent school children. That's more important than setting some reasonable limits on our gun ownership, such as Switzerland has done an amazing job of. So, freedom has been a supercharged topic here in the United States the past several years, and the reason that I have found myself compelled to want to do a performance about freedom is because my entire life has been dedicated to trying to set myself free. Truth in service to freedom. I fundamentally believe that without truth, you cannot have freedom in any way, shape, or form. And so it's always trying to get to the truth of things so that we can set ourselves free to have the maximum experience of freedom as autonomous, empowered beings on this beautiful planet that we live on. So my idea for the show was going to be one of continuously, with each successive act of the performance, continually limiting my freedom of movement. And so it's rather ironic that right now, in the real world here, not on stage, but right here in the real world, my freedom to do what I want to do has been greatly reduced. I can't juggle, I can't run, I can't bike, I can't hike, I can barely walk, I can't do so many things that I would love to be doing right now as the weather starts going into summer, get outside and play mode. This is also not entirely surprising for me because I've learned over the years that when I want to create a powerful theatrical performance, one that's actually going to take the audience on a transformative journey, one that's going to carry the audience through a story that is going to leave the audience fundamentally changed. When they walk out of the theater, they will actually experience transformation within themselves. When I seek to create performance on that level, I have found that invariably I end up living in my real life. I live the experience that I'm conveying in the performance. And so I've actually over the years started being a little more careful about what ideas I choose to work with, and maybe I should have been in this case as well, because here I am living out what it means to be physically limited in what I can do, to have my freedom physically limited. So the one other thing I want to tie in is how, for me, this version of freedom, the freedom to move my body in ways that I can do what I want to do, whatever that is, that is really primal for me, because I was always the smallest kid on the playground. And I loved that, right? I loved being tiny, because for me, that gave me agility, speed, and endurance. I don't have much body mass to carry around, so I was the best at playing tag. I was awesome at playing any kind of game that involved running. Soccer, I loved soccer. Agility, speed, and endurance, right up my alley. And most of all, I loved to run. Running was the place where I experienced transcendence. Running, from the time that I was a little kid, was where I got to experience a connection to the divine, to something much greater than this physical realm of 3 dimensions and 5 senses, right? And so that transcendent experience of running and feeling myself not only transcend my physical limits as I pushed farther and farther, but transcending the realm of physicality into the realm of spirit, that was probably the most profound experience of freedom that I have had. And I've had it taken away many, many times in my life. So I've had many running injuries that have ripped that joyful activity out of my life. And so what's interesting to me is the true meaning of freedom, the deepest experience of freedom, right? Because if my sense of joy in the world is permanently attached to my ability to run, if those two are intrinsically and inseparably linked, then when I'm injured, as I am right now, there is no joy. There's no happiness. There's no well-being. My life sucks. I'm miserable, right? So I become a slave to running. I become dependent. Running, represented by this hand, running becomes the thing I'm dependent on to have my experience of joy. I am a slave to running. I do not have freedom, if that is the case. On the other hand, if, while being injured, I can still go within myself and find joy, if I can feel joy in looking at these beautiful green lush plants that have suddenly emerged with the onset of spring, if I can experience joy listening to this incredible creek flowing behind me, if I can experience joy hanging up the hummingbird feeder and watching the hummingbirds come to feed and seeing the red feathers glint in the sunlight, if I can experience joy simply by being alive, joy at the fact that I exist, even joy in the pain, right? Like the pain of an injury, the pain of the loss of my activities, running, juggling, hiking, biking, walking, etc. That pain is just a feeling, it's just an experience, it's just a heightened state of angst. And so in that heightened state, there can even be like, wow, like a sense of, whoa, that is powerful. Like I am powerfully angry. I am powerfully upset about this. I am powerfully sad about the fact that I don't get to do these things. And at that point, it's not much different than riding a roller coaster, right? You go up the hill and you drop down, and it's just a slightly more heightened experience of gravity. And that delights in a certain way. And so even this extreme experience of loss, if I relate to it in the right way, of just like, whoa, that was a super spicy burrito, right? Like that was a lot of cayenne pepper on that food. It's not good or bad, it's just intense. And if I can experience it without the attachment of judgment of good or bad, if I can experience it without the attachment of my desire to be able to do these activities, if I can just experience it as what currently is going on, then I can choose to seek to experience joy, well-being, fulfillment, happiness, connection, transcendence, all the things that I personally value in life, I can experience in other ways. Sitting to meditate, talking with a friend on the phone or the computer, going and meeting up with a friend in person, sharing a cup of tea, sharing stories, soaking in the hot springs. There's so many things I can do to experience those same fundamental states of being that I value so much. So I'm going to kind of bring this to a close because I'm going to probably talk more and more about this, and I don't want to make this particular video too long. But I want to end just giving an example of what I think is possibly the most powerful story I know of that really embodies this principle. And it's a book called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And it's written by a gentleman who was the editor of, I believe, Vogue magazine in France, although it may have been Elle. Anyhow, one of the big fashion magazines in the fashion center of the universe, France. He was the editor, right? So this is like a very high-powered job. This is the definition of someone who's achieved worldly and material success. And he was divorced, he had a child, he went to pick up his kid for the weekend. He's driving his kid to wherever they were going to go spend the weekend, at some little cottage on the coast, or I can't remember exactly what. And he has a brain event, meaning his brain, something went horribly wrong. And he suddenly had something along the lines of a stroke. Car ran into the ditch. Child is freaking out. People come along and find him. And he's basically left in a condition called the locked-in syndrome, where his mind, when he came out of the injury state, his mind was completely functional, sharp as it ever had been. He couldn't move any of his body, full paralysis, except he could blink one eye. And so, in order to not spiral into the most crushing depression, and in order to experience something meaningful in life, he would each day go on a journey of imagination. He would imagine that he was in a diving bell down at the bottom of the ocean and what that would be like. He would imagine that he was a butterfly flying off flower to flower, and what would that be like? And each day he would meticulously compose these stories. After going on the imaginary journey, he would compose the story in his mind, memorize it, and then transcribe the story using not quite Morse code, but a transcription method that they had developed with him and his nurse, where he would blink his way through the alphabet and then select one letter at a time to spell a word, each word then creating sentences, paragraphs, and stories. So he writes an entire book by blinking one letter at a time to someone who's transcribing. And more importantly, what he did in the ultimate prison of a body that is completely not functioning, but a mind that is sharp as a whip, in that ultimate prison, he found freedom. He found a way to be free despite the fact that everything in his whole life had been ripped away, that he lost everything, and that he was in a jail cell exactly the size of his own body, and he couldn't even wiggle a finger. So it's an amazing story, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. I highly recommend you read it. It's beautifully written, fairly short, but really one of the most uplifting in many ways and heart-wrenching and beautiful stories of the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. So that's a little starting point talking about freedom. I currently don't have the freedom I want, but I have an almost infinite amount of freedom outside of a couple little confines of these injuries at the moment. And I believe we'll talk some more about freedom as I continue to try and post. I guess the one final thing I'll say, the reason my house is still not built, I still have a lot of work to do, but the reason I'm recording this video now is because when I was in meditation, trying to get a sense of why this injury happened, one of the few really clear messages that came through was, Sven, set up the camera and start talking. It is time to start sharing what I have to share with the larger world, even if the house isn't done. And fortunately, now that we're moving into nicer weather, I can film out here in the splendor and grandeur of these wonderful natural settings here on my property, and maybe in some of the surrounding mountains later. Anyhow, I wish you all the best. So much love going out to the world and to all of you people. I know this time period right now, I know so many people who've lost loved ones.